Recorded Books and RB Digital present Catalyst by Michael C. Grumley. Narrated by Scott Brick.
Prologue. With a painful wince, Steve Caesar brushed back his shirt and slid a hand down over the handle of his gun. The hallway he stood in was richly decorated with white marble walls and thick beige carpeting, allowing him to approach the door with very little sound. Caesar glanced up at one of the overhead chandeliers, scanning the ceiling and walls for cameras. Too well hidden. His hotel uniform was bulging at the seams, barely containing his broad frame beneath. Anyone taking a close look at a monitor would notice something wrong with his appearance. The Tivoli Mofarrege was one of the most elegant hotels in Sao Paulo, and certainly the most expensive. Used by the wealthiest clientele, the hotel emanated a raw sense of power and prestige, towering among the cityscape of Brazil's richest city. It had taken him 2 weeks. 2 weeks following the man he had now tracked to the room at the end of the hall. Miguel Blanco was living large off the money he had stolen from Mateus Alves, his previous employer and one of the richest men in South America. After killing his former boss, Blanco had successfully stolen nearly 100 million Brazilian reales from Alves's various accounts and trusts. It was only a fraction of the old man's wealth, but it was more than enough. Enough to become one of the very elites Blanco had spent much of his life protecting. And it had been no easy task. Gaining access to Alves's accounts was one thing. Blanco already had help with that. The hard part was covering his tracks. For that, he needed the help of several others, compadres who were discreet and also stood to gain handsomely from the disassembling of Alves's vast fortune. Caesar, however, didn't care about the money. He was there for a very different reason. The old man had been as corrupt as his murderer, and Caesar held no sympathy for either of them. He was there for one thing and one thing only: retribution. He was there because if it had been up to Blanco, Caesar would have been just as dead, lying next to the old man on top of that mountain. But Blanco didn't know he had survived, and after 2 weeks of searching, Caesar was about to pay him the mother of all surprise visits. The absence of anyone guarding the door left Caesar a bit wary as he crept closer. Guests staying in a presidential suite usually had a security detail. Where was Blanco's? The man had previously been an officer in the Brazilian intelligence agency, which typically left men overconfident or completely paranoid. But if he was paranoid, where was his detail? Blanco was definitely in the room. At least he had been 30 minutes ago. They had zeroed in on the target's cell phone signal and pinpointed it to 30 meters from where Caesar was now standing, before it was abruptly switched off. Now, 10 feet from the door, he silently slid the .40 caliber Glock out from its concealed holster and laid his index finger along the side, just above the trigger guard. He turned his head slightly, using his peripheral vision to check the hall behind him one last time. When he reached the door, Caesar kept to the side and brought the gun around his right hip. He raised it smoothly and leaned in closer, listening. There was no sound at all. No voices, no television, nothing. Blanco hadn't left Rio de Janeiro with anyone except the one person Caesar knew would be with him, Alves's young and long-time personal assistant, Carolina Sosa. She was the one person who had access to many of the old man's accounts and other verifiable information. She was the gateway to Alves's riches. Caesar withdrew a small magnetic card, a used but very valuable card. It came from the hotel, which took only a few hours to find in Sao Paulo, from a person who could encode a master keycard.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.